March next year. So what we've done is repurpose £150 million of that funding to provide additional flexibility to the Northern Ireland Executive in respect to that funding stream and schools. We are determined to see more parents given the opportunity to choose integrated education for their children as a vital part of the process of reconciliation, and I for one am especially committed to it as somebody who proudly attends a Baptist church where for many years I worshipped with a Roman Catholic lady and had no idea. We should help Northern Ireland move to the point that denomination is a small matter and people move forward together.
An important item in the in tray of the newly reformed executive is early years education and childcare. Thanks to the actions of this government, we now have more generous entitlement to free childcare in England and Northern Ireland. Will he discuss with the executive how Northern Ireland might be levelled up on childcare, including, for example, using revenue-raising measures?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this, and I'm very grateful to her for putting it on the agenda. Certainly we will engage with the executive on this point, and she is, of course, absolutely right to mention revenue raising. It is a fact that the executive needs to both transform public services and improve revenue raising so that everything there can be on a sustainable basis.
Mr. Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also recently visited the Forge Integrated Primary School in Belfast, and I saw their many much needed and developed plans to replace their porter cabins with buildings to answer for the need, an extra need for integrated schools. They're very disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that this has been shelved along with projects in 9 other integrated schools. Education is devolved, but this was earmarked UK government money agreed under the 2015 Fresh Start Agreement. Does the Secretary of State understand why teachers, pupils and parents are so disappointed that those plans have been shelved, and does he have any plans to restore them? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do hear the honourable lady, and my right honourable friend the Secretary of State and I do of course understand people's concerns, and we too have visited schools. I certainly have. I think my right honourable friend has. But I would repeat again that what we've done is repurpose the money so that it could endure and be available to the executive to be used for purposes as they decide. If we'd not repurposed it, the money would have expired at the end of March next year. So actually I'm proud that we've taken the steps necessary with the Treasury to enable this money to continue to be available to the executive. But it is for them to decide how to spend it, but we do continue to be fully committed to integrated education.
The Northern Irish Public's relief at the restoration of the Assembly 6.
I've met with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister last week where we had a constructive discussion about the Executive's priorities.
Public's relief at the restoration of the Assembly has given way to frustration at the lack of pace of delivery by the Executive. After a 2-year void, they are saying they don't want to be hurried to deliver for Northern Ireland. Health care staff who are oppressed, people waiting for special educational needs, and people watching Lough Neagh face into another summer of algae bloom are very much in a hurry for action. Northern Ireland urgently needs a delivery plan, it needs a programme for government, and it needs a budget. Yes, resources are part of that. Can the Minister update on any negotiations on the fiscal framework, and will he impress on the Executive the need for urgent action and not just warm words?
Secretary of State.
The one thing I did pick up from the First Minister and Deputy First Minister last week is they too want to act in all the ways that the honourable lady said, and their priorities include developing a programme for government which will enable them to take forward the vital work of public service transformation. They're only 12 weeks in, and I do look forward to good results in the short, medium and long term.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I wish to welcome our special guest who is observing our proceedings today, His Excellency Joria and Abdullah, Speaker of the House of Representatives of Malaya. Your Excellency, you are most welcome. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Jonathan Gillis.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have been asked to reply. I know that members across the House will wish to join me in offering condolences to the family and friends of Lord Frank Field. He was an outstanding parliamentarian who worked tirelessly to make society a better place. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is in Berlin he has announced the biggest strengthening of our defence in a generation. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that members will also want to join me in wishing the Jewish community a happy Passover, a celebration of freedom. But of course, we remember the empty chairs of those hostages still being held captive in Gaza and call for their immediate release. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Jonathan Gullis.
Mr. Speaker, I too would like to pass on my thoughts and prayers to Lord Field's family, friends and colleagues, and particularly the students and teachers at the Birches Head Academy in Stoke-on-Trent who are part of the Frankfield Education Trust. Mr. Speaker, since being elected in 2019, I've helped reopen Tunstall Town Hall with a new library and family hub, secured funding for additional CCTV, a new alley gate and better lighting in Tunstall to make sure our streets are safe. Breathing new life as well into Tunstall's old library and Bath thanks to this government's levelling up fund of £56 million to Stoke-on-Trent. But sadly, Labour-led Stoke-on-Trent City Council seek to undermine this progress by introducing a brand new garden tax on residents to have their garden waste collected, refuse to take cunning enforcement against rogue and absent landlords who plague Tunstall High Street, and are increasing crime and antisocial behaviour by dumping undesirable people in the centre of Tunstall at the Sneed Arms Hotel. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that Stoke-on-Trent Labour...
Order. It's normally Mr. Gullis who's loud, so please, let me hear it.
It just goes to show the disdain the Labour Party have for Stoke-on-Trent. So does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me? It's time for Stoke-on-Trent Labour to axe the garden tax, to take the fight to lousy landlords and... Order. There is a question to be asked, and there is a time in which we ask it. I suggest he puts in for an adjournment debate. I'm sure you've got the answer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's not much I can add to that. He has ever proved what an excellent campaigner he is for his constituents. And of course, he highlights the same problems with Labour councils across the country, raising taxes and letting services fall into disrepair. And of course, he's totally right to be holding rogue landlords to account.
Right, we now come to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I first of all share with the Deputy Prime Minister's comments regarding our Jewish community and a happy Passover, and also start by acknowledging the loss of David Marquand and Baroness Massey, both of whom made historic contributions in this Parliament, politics and wider life. And also send my condolences following today's news to the family of Lord Frankfield, who is a good friend of mine and a colleague, and who was a tireless campaigner against poverty and a champion for his constituents. Mr. Speaker, I know the party opposite is desperate to talk about my living arrangements, but the public want to know what this government is going to do about theirs. Natalie from Brighton has been served with 2 no-fault eviction notices in 18 months. She joins nearly 1 million families at risk of homelessness due to his party's failure to ban this cruel practice. Now, instead of obsessing over my house, when will he get a grip and show the same obsession with ending no-fault evictions?
Well, to begin with, it is a pleasure to have another exchange with the Right Honourable Lady in this House, our 5th in 12 months. Any more of these, and she'll be claiming it as her principal residence. On the issue of no-fault evictions, it may have escaped the Right Honourable Lady's attention, but we will be voting on exactly that matter later today. The Conservative government taking action.
Mr. Speaker, he clearly thought he could spend all week obsessing over my living arrangements. I didn't even bother to read up on his own government's bill this afternoon. The reality is he caved in to vested interests on his backbenchers and delayed justice for people like Natalie. Yes. This week, the Housing Minister said there is no solid date for banning no-fault evictions. The Housing Secretary now says it won't happen before an election. So if he can give us a date, can he name it now?
I can name the date for the Right Honourable Lady. Today. It's today that this House will be voting on it, and I'm confident that in line with our manifesto, we will deliver on that commitment.
Councillor Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, he clearly hasn't been looking up on his own government bills. But let me turn to another Tory housing failure. Leaseholds are a rip-off and a con. But the government's proposed ban on new leaseholds applies only to houses. The majority of leaseholds are in flats. What's the point on a ban on new leaseholds if it won't apply to flats?
Again, the Right Honourable Lady is talking about legislation introduced by this government, which the party opposite totally failed to introduce in their entire time in office. And it's no surprise, because it's this government which has brought social housing waiting lists down by nearly 500,000 and delivered more affordable homes in the last year and the last 12 years than Labour delivered when they were in office. But of course, all of this can only be paid for by making sure that we have a strong economy. And I'll tell you, her policy to repeal every single Conservative trade union law in the first 100 days would open the door to French-style wildcat strikes, sweeping away the reforms that made this country great. And we all know, though, Mr. Speaker, the one reform that the Right Honourable Lady would not abolish from Margaret Thatcher, the right to buy your council house.
Councillor Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, I was expecting a little bit better from him today. He seems to be a bit worn out. Maybe it's the 3 a.m. calls from the bad men that have been keeping him up at night. But he also, Mr. Speaker, he also talks about strikes and the unions. We've had more strikes under this government's watch than any time before. And once again, he hasn't read his own bill. Their ban on leasehold won't apply to the majority of people. It's like banning non-doms but exempting Tory prime ministers. And he speaks about affordable homes. Families are trapped in temporary accommodation and stuck on waiting lists. And in the West Midlands, his mayor has used his multi-million-pound housing budget to build just 46 social homes in 8 years. That's almost as many as the Chancellor's property portfolio. But the British people know that his party won't build the homes that this country needs. So when are they going to get a chance to vote for a government that will?
Well, I'm surprised the Right Honourable Lady raises the West Midlands when Labour-controlled Birmingham have virtually bankrupted the council, are hiking up council tax by 21%, whilst in the meantime, and I'm sure this would please her, continuing to hand out £1.8 million to the trade unions. By contrast, Andy Street, our brilliant mayor of the wider West Midlands, has delivered £6.1 billion of investment to improve transport. So there you have it, the contrast between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. The usual political opportunism from her, failing to ask about the issues that really matter. If you want more bin collections, more potholes filled, lower debt and lower council tax, vote Conservative, because whether it's Ben Houchin in the Tees Valley or whether it's Andy Street in the West Midlands, it's only the Conservative mayors who deliver more for less.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's pretty revealing that he thinks that housing isn't an issue for the British people, because I think it really is. And people in glass houses shouldn't throw the stones, because in Birmingham, And across the whole of this country, councils are facing black holes because of his government's austerity programme. And I would also warn the Deputy Prime Minister that Tory councils have also faced 114 notices, and Birmingham Council has had over £1 billion taken from their budget from some of the poorest people. More than 16,000 families face losing their homes after the party's mini-budget, Mr Speaker, and mortgage bills continue to soar. Meanwhile, the former Prime Minister parades around the world in a twisted victory lap promoting a new book, saying that the mini-budget was her proudest moment. So since she won't apologise to those families losing their home, will he?
Well, what the Prime Minister has done since he has taken office with the Chancellor is to restore stability to our economy, inflation halved and more down to 3%. And as a result of that, in an increasingly dangerous world, the Prime Minister was able to announce his plan for the biggest strengthening of defence spending in a generation. But it should come as no surprise that the party opposite refused to say whether they back it or not, because this comes from the Right Honourable Lady who voted to scrap Trident and install in Downing Street someone who wanted to change the army into a Peace Corps. There you have it.
Mr Speaker, defence, we all want to see 2.5%. The difference is that we haven't cut the army to its smallest size since Napoleon. And Mr Speaker, never mind some secretive deep state. Never mind some secretive deep state. It's the state of the Tory party that's the problem. They're in a deep state of sewerage. After 14 years, they failed renters, they failed leaseholders, and they failed mortgage holders. But, Mr Speaker, I read with interest that the Right Honourable Gentleman has been urging his neighbour in Number 10 to call an election because he's worried they might get wiped out. Has he finally realised that when he stabbed Boris Johnson in the back to get his mate into Number 10, he was ditching their biggest election winner for a pint-sized loser?
I think the whole House will have heard, despite all the bluster from the lady opposite, not a single word on whether she would actually back our plans to invest in our armed forces. No plans in a dangerous world. And, of course, as ever, the Deputy Leader is always looking to attack others' failures, but never the one to take responsibility for her own. She once said, "You shouldn't be waiting for the police to bang on your door. If you did it, then you shouldn't be doing your job." The Right Honourable Landlady should forget her tax advice and follow her own advice.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And levelling up, like my friend earlier, in the Calder Valley is absolutely on fire. £196.5 million for hospital reconfiguration, £150 million for flood defences, no fewer than 11 schools being remodelled or rebuilt as we speak. £45 million for 3 town centre regeneration, and Elland is getting a new railway station as well. Yeah. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that the naysayers around about levelling up need look no further than the Calder Valley to see what a great achievement this government is doing?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It's not just the Colne Valley, but it's communities up and down the country. The government is investing billions in infrastructure across the United Kingdom, creating jobs and opportunities in every region. And I know that my honourable friend has been a staunch advocate for the Calder Valley, which is a fantastic example of that in action.
It's Leader of the SNP, Murray Black.
May I join in wishing the Jewish community a happy Passover and also in sending my condolences to the families of family and loved ones of Frank Field. 2 years ago, when mass graves were discovered in Ukraine, this House united in condemnation and rightly treated these graves as evidence of war crimes which Russia must be made to answer for. Yesterday, Palestinian officials uncovered 2 mass graves outside the bombed hospitals in Gaza. These graves also constitute as a war crime, don't they?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, of course, we would expect the democratic government of Israel to investigate any allegations of misconduct, and that's exactly what they do, and it's exactly what the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister urge them to do. But I find it quite extraordinary that she seeks to draw parallels between the legitimate war of self-defence of Israel and the conduct of Russia.
Murray Black.
300 bodies, including the elderly and the injured, some of which had been stripped naked, mutilated, with their hands tied behind their backs. The UK's own arms policy states that if there is even a risk that war crimes may be taking place, then that is reason enough to halt the sale of arms. Given all we know, why then is the Prime Minister yet to do so?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, we continue to urge the Israeli government to investigate any allegations of misconduct. The difference, though, is that we can trust the Israeli government, a democratically elected government, to properly investigate those things. And, of course, we keep the advice under review. The Foreign Secretary has recently made it clear that he has conducted a determination and has not changed his advice regarding export licences, and I think that is the correct decision.
Colin McCartney.
Speaker, the good people of Lincoln who all declare their taxes and pay tax on their profit when selling their second homes overwhelmingly want Lincoln Christmas Market to be brought back after the Labour-run City Council cruelly closed it last year. The Labour City Councils refused to do what the people of Lincoln want. What message will the Deputy Prime Minister send to the voters of Lincoln before next week's local elections?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'm afraid that what the honourable gentleman has described is the Grinch in action. That Christmas market in the home of the Magna Carta was beloved by local residents. They have totally ignored the wishes of local residents and cancelled it, and they should reverse that decision.
Issy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Liberal Democrats, may I also offer our condolences to the friends and family of the late Lord Frankfield and to wish a happy Passover to all those in the Jewish community. Mr. Speaker, unpaid carers have shared heartbreaking stories of how they have been hounded by the DWP and told to pay huge fines for minor infringements on carers' allowance earning rules, all because the government failed to do anything about a problem they have known about for years. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, one of the Prime Minister's own dementia advisers resigned, saying that this government's treatment of those unpaid carers was beyond the pale. So will the Deputy Prime Minister apologise to all those unpaid carers who have been failed by his government and commit to a full review of the system?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, I pay tribute to all those unpaid carers. Indeed, I met some of them over the weekend. I know how hard they work, and they keep our society functioning through their commitment to us. And that's why we've actually uprated the benefits by £81.90 a week and increased the carers allowance by almost £1,500 since 2010. Now, in respect of allegations of overpayment, of course, appropriate discretion should be shown, but if it is the case that there have been erroneous overpayments, it's right on behalf of the taxpayer to be able to recuperate those. But of course, we'll work with anyone who's struggling with those repayments to negotiate sustainable and affordable repayment plans.
Virginia Crosby.
Mr. Speaker, my Ireland constituency of Unismore is accessed via 2 bridges, the Menai Suspension Bridge and the Britannia Bridge. Holyhead is the second busiest port in the UK, but bridge repairs and the weather can result in long traffic queues. To make the most of our Anglesey Freeport and new nuclear at Wilver, a third crossing is vital. And last year, the Welsh Labour government scrapped plans for all new road projects, including our third bridge. On behalf of my Unismore constituents, will the Deputy Prime Minister use his influence to ensure that North Wales is not ignored by Cardiff and we get that third bridge?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I know and understand the frustration across Wales, and particularly in the Honourable Lady's constituency, with this state of affairs. The Welsh Government have not prioritised building new roads. They're damaging growth potential in places like Anglesey. They're spending over 100 million on new politicians. And we will work with the Right Honourable Lady to make sure we resolve this.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative candidate for London Mayor has promoted Islamophobic tropes online,
Shame on her.
endorsed the beliefs of Enoch Powell, and claimed the black community has a problem with crime. In the week that we marked the 31st anniversary of the murder of Stephen Lawrence, does the Deputy Prime Minister really endorse these views?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I think the Honourable Lady knows that she does not correctly represent the views of the candidate, and I find it extraordinary that she raises the issue of crime, because whilst Labour's London Mayor has increased the precept by over 70%. Actually, recorded crime has increased 20% in London. That is the record of the Labour London Mayor, and no wonder people will be voting against him.
Cheryl Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I note that I'm the chair of the Fisheries APPG and thank the government for the recent pollock catch compensation. On the 12th of May, we will see the first ever National Fishing Remembrance Day. I'll be marking this occasion by laying a wreath at a service being held at Lew Quayside by the memorial plaque, which has the name of my late husband and unfortunately others on it. Will the Deputy Prime Minister, and will he ask the Prime Minister to mark this occasion by remembering those who have died, bringing this important food source to our table?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I know how important this is to the Honourable Lady, and I'm sure she will be remembering her late husband Neil on this day. It's important that we all recognise the sacrifices made by fishermen and women to bring food to our table, and I know that my colleague Minister Spencer will be visiting Grimsby on that day.
At Weston.
Mr. Speaker, in today's Northern Echo, Borough Chairman Steve Gibson describes the Mayor of Tees Valley as having given away the future of the region's children. He was referring to the 40% of Tees Works with a forecast worth of £500 million gifted by Lord Houchin in a deal to two local business mates. Mr. Gibson, who helped establish the Local Development Corporation, describes it as unforgivable. Will the government finally admit Lord Houchin and the Conservatives have sold the Teesside taxpayers down the river?
He talks about Teesside taxpayers. Actually, Ben Houchin has never imposed a mayoral precept in Tees Valley, full stop. And actually, at the same time, he's saved Teesside Airport and secured a new free port for Teesside. No wonder people will be voting for him again.
So Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask my right honourable friend if he has seen the video that is doing the rounds of the theft in the shop in my constituency, Station Road, Boots the Chemist. In a space of 8 minutes, two threatening individuals robbed thousands of pounds out of that shop. And they're not alone. This is happening again and again and again. In fact, one of my team went out and photographed them leaving, brazenly, not caring and even spitting at the police. Will he now please say to the Home Secretary, through to the police, this is not a petty crime. This is a threat of violence and massive robbery. This should be a priority for the police. What we just talk about always is more police. Surely what we should be asking to be is more effective policing and get them off the streets.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I think my right honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this, and often it's the allegedly lower-level crimes are the ones that cause the biggest impact on communities. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has been very clear on that point, and I will make it to him again. Is also why we're rolling out a range of crime prevention measures through the Safer Streets Fund, improving CCTV and street lighting, and we introduced the Police Crime and Sentencing Courts Act, again to give greater powers to the police to deliver tougher sentences for more serious offenders.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier on in the session, the Deputy Prime Minister said that when the Prime Minister and Chancellor took office, they restored stability to the UK economy. Who does he think caused the instability?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I remember. They might want to forget it, but I remember the day the Conservatives came into office in 2010, and what was the note left on the desk of the Chief Secretary? There is no money left. That is the challenge that we have addressed through the Prime Minister and Chancellor successively.
Mr. Speaker, Labour's mayoral candidate in the West Midlands talks about housing but makes no commitment to protect our precious Greenbelt. He talks about transport, but he fails to commit to reopening Aldridge train station. And he committed to saving police stations such as Aldridge. Then when the Labour PCC said he would close them, he changed his mind and agreed to that. So we are left wondering, in my constituency, what does he stand for? So does my right honourable friend agree with me that only Mayor Andy Street has a plan and a track record to be trusted to deliver for the West Midlands?
Well, as ever, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct to highlight the record of Labour's Police and Crime Commissioner. And West Midlands Police have actually been put in special measures on Simon Foster's watch. And when it comes to the Greenbelt, we've all seen the new wheeze from the Labour Party. Redesignate Greenbelt, Grey Belt and concrete all over it. Well, the Conservatives will not allow that to happen, and people up and down the country will vote Conservative to stop that happening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Conservative ministers like to blame strikes and the pandemic for the appalling waiting times in the NHS. The Blackpool Teaching Hospitals Trust hasn't hit its target for seeing patients in A&E within 4 hours since 2015. Before the strikes, before the pandemic, but 5 years after the Conservatives came to office. So who does the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, blame for that?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, the party opposite like to pretend the pandemic didn't happen, and they like that is the cause of the biggest pressure on the NHS. And they complain about NHS performance whilst backing strikes by doctors who unreasonably want a 35% pay rise. And despite all of those pressures, actually, A&E performance has improved in the past month.
Mr. Speaker, the Labour leader of the almost bankrupt Hastings Borough Council and several other Labour councillors resigned from the Labour Party, citing that the National Labour Party has become overly authoritarian, a dereliction of local democracy, has lost its moral compass and is suffocating local voices because its only objective is power for power's sake. Would the Deputy Prime Minister agree that voting for Conservative candidates in upcoming elections will ensure local voices are heard and local democracy is upheld and better services are delivered?
Deputy Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the really serious concerns about Labour councillors in Hastings. And this is what one former Labour councillor said. Labour are no longer providing the policies, support or focus on local government. I couldn't have put it better myself.
Mary Glendon.
Speaker, with thousands of steelworkers' jobs on the line, the likelihood of industrial action and reports of a deal for India to be exempt from carbon taxes, will this government now back this detailed, serious and robust multi-union proposal as the only way to keep primary steel making in the UK?
The government will engage with any proposals that have been brought forward, as we always do, but it is actually the case that we've already provided over £700 million in energy cost relief to the steel sector in the past 10 years, and it's also the case that even the past year, the government spent £97 million more on UK-made steel for major public projects. So we're continuing to work with the steel industry, but we've already provided tremendous support.
John Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I very much associate myself with the remarks of my right honourable friend regarding Lord Frank Field. He was a good man. I very much welcome the government's firm commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5% by 2030, something that will send the right message to our allies and potential adversaries alike. And it's something that the 1922 Defence Committee has been campaigning for a little while. Would my right honourable friend do what he can to ensure, though, that some of that increased money is spent on additional recruitment, including, if necessary, increasing wages sufficiently, to ensure that the Navy can man its ships, the Air Force can maintain its aircraft, and the Army can dominate ground?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I know what a staunch advocate my honourable friend is for the armed forces and for funding the armed forces. And I think it's something that all of us can take great pride in, that we are putting the resources in now to meet the challenges that the nation is likely to face over the next 5 years. We'll be working through the allocation of that, but it is already the case that in January we had the largest ever number of applications in recent years to join the armed forces. So we're making progress on that.
John Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Lisa cares for her mother. She works part-time at WH Smith's and so was sure to keep the DWP informed so that she wouldn't be overpaid carers allowance. But because of a DWP blunder, she now faces a bill for £4,000.
Wow, shame.
The Secretary of State for Science cares for her career. She works part-time as a woke detector. But when she blundered, calling a top scientist a Hamas supporter, the bill, tens of thousands of pounds in costs and damages, was picked up by taxpayers. Like Lisa. Why?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, it's this government has uprated benefits for carers, almost £1,500 more. Of course, I think it is the case that her constituents and my constituents, people up and down the country, would expect the government to seek to recover overpaid sums. But of course, we need to do that in a compassionate way, and if people are struggling to make repayments, I know that the DWP will engage to make sure that they have a sustainable and affordable way to make those repayments.
Robin Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the tributes and condolences paid to the late, great Frank Field? One of his lasting achievements in the world of education is the holiday activities and food fund, something that this government can take great pride in having funded. Can I urge my right honourable friend to use his good offices across government to make sure we secure a multi-year settlement for the continuance of that vital work?
The Prime Minister.
Yes, well, I know what an important piece of work this is, and his commitment to campaigning for it. We've already provided substantial sums for it, and I'm sure we will continue to do so.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the chair of the Scottish arm of Feeding Britain, can I thank you and the front benches for their tributes to the great Frank Field. He chaired an all-party parliamentary inquiry 10 years ago on food poverty, and food bank use has increased relentlessly since then. So can I ask the government to consider, in Frank Field's memory, a cross-sector summit with the aim of helping communities to secure the resources to deliver food security programmes at the scale that is necessary?
Well, I join him in paying tribute to Lord Frank Field's campaigning. It is actually the case that over the past couple of years we've provided over £108 billion worth of support with the cost of living, including extra cost of living payments of £900 last year. The effect of all of that is actually there are 1.1 million fewer people living in absolute poverty than when the Conservatives came to office.
Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week we had the Finance Bill, and in it I noticed a reduction in the capital gains tax from 28% to 24% on residential properties to try and turbo boost the residential market. So will this apply retrospectively? So hypothetically, if you're a Labour frontbencher who could owe capital gains tax, will you benefit from this Conservative tax cut?
Well, I've always believed in having lower taxes that everyone pays.
Final question, Kate Osborne.
Mr. Speaker, this week marks the 5th Lesbian Visibility Week, founded by my good friend, publisher of Diva magazine, Linda Riley. This comes at a time when LGBTQIA women are being let down by this government, and nowhere more so than by their failure to remove the financial burdens that same-sex couples face when accessing IVF. My constituents, Holly and Leanne, like so many others, have been priced out of having a family. So will the Deputy Prime Minister commit to finally ending this gay tax for same-sex couples who want to start a family?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I would dispute the Honourable Lady's characterisation of this government's record in this area. It was actually this government that introduced marriage for same-sex couples and passed the Turing Law. Now, she raises an important point, which I'm happy to take up with the Health Secretary, but the overall record of this government is an excellent one.
That completes Deputy Prime Minister's question. Right, we now come to the statement called the Secretary of State for Defence, Grant Shapps.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'd like to update the House on the government's commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5% this decade. In January, in my speech to Lancaster House, I warned that we're entering a much more dangerous period, a much more dangerous world, and I made the case for a national conversation about defence spending. Since then, Putin has stepped up his attacks on Ukraine. China is increasingly assertive. Tensions have escalated in the Middle East, culminating in Iran's unprecedented attack on Israel 10 days ago, conducted in parallel with the proxies that Iran has nourished around Israel's border and the Middle East, including, of course, the Houthis, who continue to hold global trade hostage in the Red Sea. Mr. Speaker, since January, the world has become even more dangerous, not less, and we continue to ask more of our courageous and professional armed forces. Our sailors have served under the constant risk of attack in the Red Sea, helping to protect international shipping and our own cost of living. We bolstered our Royal Air Force presence in the Middle East, enabling Typhoon crews to intercept Iranian drones and missiles recently fired towards Israel. And around 20,000 of our personnel from all three of our services, with a huge inventory of naval, air and land assets, have been active around Europe as part of the largest NATO training exercise since the Cold War. In short, Mr. Speaker, we increasingly need our armed forces, and we increasingly are asking more of them. So yesterday, the Prime Minister committed to hit the 2.5% of GDP for defence by 2030. It means we'll invest an additional £75 billion into defence over the next 6 years, and it will be funded in full without any increases in either borrowing or debt. This represents the biggest strengthening of our national defence in a generation, and as the NATO General Secretary said yesterday, it will ensure the UK remains by far the largest European defence spender in NATO and it means we're the second biggest NATO spender overall. It will provide a very significant boost for the UK defence science, innovation and manufacturing. It will make our defence industries more resilient and bigger, and it will mean that we're able to restock some of those global supplies required in order to continue to ensure that we're not only able to provide our own armed forces, those in Ukraine, but also be a competitive export sector as well. We also recognise the important role that defence plays in our national resilience by developing a new plan that, for the first time, brings together the civil and the military planning for how we would respond in the most severe risks that face our country. And, Mr. Speaker, our additional £75 billion on defence is also enabling us to ramp up that support for Ukraine. Honourable and right honourable members on both sides of the House have shared the government's concern about the warnings that President Zelensky has been issuing, and his most senior generals have confirmed that their ability to match Russia's force is increasingly difficult. And so, as NATO partners, we're looking at each other to see that leadership, and the UK government has stepped forward. We're providing the alliance with the decisive leadership demanded in this knife-edge moment of this existential war. And so we've committed this week an extra £500 million of military aid to Ukraine this year, bringing our total package to £3 billion. And our total, in fact, since Putin's full-scale invasion, is now more than £12.5 billion, £7.5 billion of which is military aid. In addition, we've provided NATO partners with leadership by delving even deeper into our own military inventory to give Ukraine our largest package of equipment and support to date. Now, this support announced this week includes millions of rounds of ammunition, 1,600 key munitions, including air defence and precision long-range missiles, over 400 armoured, protected and all-terrain vehicles, as well as support with logistics to support and bolster the front lines, support to get the F-16 pilots who trained in the UK into the air as soon as possible, and a further 60 boats to help Ukraine strengthen their remarkable grip over the Black Sea, including offshore raiding craft and dive boats. Our £75 billion defence investment will help Ukraine get back onto the front foot. And coupled with the reforms that we've introduced to make procurement faster and more effective, it will put our defence industrial base on a war footing. It will fire up the UK's defence industry with an additional £10 billion over the next decade for munitions production. That will bring our total spend on munitions to around £25 billion over the same period. We're delivering for those who serve to guarantee our freedoms as well, with over £4 billion to be invested in upgrading accommodation to build new living quarters for our personnel over the next decade. And we're also working seamlessly with key allies to strengthen our collective deterrent and develop new, innovative capabilities. Just last month, I was in Australia to advance our AUKUS programme with our Australian and our US partners. This will develop and deliver a range of cutting-edge kit in addition to the next generation of nuclear-powered submarines. And at the end of last year, I was in Japan to advance our GCAP programme. That's the development of the sixth-generation fighter jet with Italy and with Japan. And just last week, I was in Telford to see the first fully British tank for 22 years coming off the production line. And just one strand of our Future Soldier programme to make our army more integrated and much more lethal. Defence already, of course, supports tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs, real quality to them in the UK, including over 200,000 directly in the industry. And our additional £75 billion will open up many more opportunities in regions up and down this country. Mr. Speaker, this is a turning point in UK defence. We must spend more because defence of the realm is the first duty of every government. Yeah. And on this side of the House, we recognise that fact. But whilst I want to see peace and, of course, international order being restored, I'm also absolutely convinced that it's hopeful thinking, even complacency, to imagine that we can do that without ensuring we are better protected. The best way of keeping a country safe and to protect our way of life is deterrence. Being prepared, being clear-eyed about the threats we face, being clear about our capabilities, backing UK defence science, technology and innovation, carrying not just a big stick, but the most advanced and capable stick that we can possibly develop. And yes, using our military muscle alongside our allies. Our investment in our continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent makes would-be adversaries think twice. And on this side of the House, we haven't just come to the conclusion that our nation's nuclear deterrent is there because an election is approaching. We have always believed in our nuclear deterrent. This is an additional £75 billion boost for our armed forces. And in the build-up to the NATO summit in Washington, I'll do all I can to get alliance members to follow our lead, to bolster their armed forces, to strengthen their industrial base, invest in innovation, maximise their military deterrence, and to maximise their support for Ukraine, most importantly of all. Because in a more dangerous world, when we face an excess of authoritarian states, 2.5% must now become the new baseline for the entire alliance. If we're to deter, lead and defend, that is what is required of us. And I commend this statement to the House.
Secretary of State John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for the advance copy of his statement. There is much to welcome in this statement and more widely today, with the US Congress finally passing the bill for more military aid to Ukraine and the Prime Minister finally making a multi-year commitment to UK military aid beyond this year. We do indeed face a much more dangerous world, with British forces now in action defending international shipping in the Red Sea, reinforcing NATO allies on the Russian border and protecting us all 24/7. They are respected worldwide for their total professionalism. They require our support from all sides of this House. So we welcome the new commitments to Ukraine funding. We welcome the build-up stockpiles to boost defence exports, to give priority to domestic defence production and to set up a new strategic headquarters in the MOD. All plans I've argued for in this post. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State is right when he says the first duty of any government is to defend the country and keep its citizens safe. And Labour will always do what's required, spend what's required on defence. And the last time the UK did spend 2.5% of GDP on defence was in 2010 with Labour. Never matched in any one of the 14 Tory years since. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Labour leader said, we want a fully funded plan for 2.5% of GDP on defence. We share the same ambition as the government because we must do more to deal with the growing threats. We want this to be fully costed and fully funded. We want it to be set out in the government's baseline budgets. This 2030 target is not. It's in a press release. Why was this 2030 plan not in last month's budget? Or any of the other 5 budgets and autumn statements since the government first promised to spend 2.5% by 2030 2 years ago? None hit 2.5%, none reversed real cuts in day-to-day defence spending, none matched Labour's record in government. If this 2030 plan had been in a budget, it would have been independently checked, openly costed and fully funded. So where is the additional money coming from? How much from which other R&D budgets? How much from cutting how many civil servants in which departments? Mr. Speaker, they've tried this trick before. In the 2015 Defence Review, ministers pledged to cut 30% of the MOD civil servants to make their defence spending plans add up. Civil servant numbers didn't go down, they went up. Not down to 41,000, but up to 63,000. Now, he's mentioned an additional 75 billion 5 times in his statement. Over the next 6 years, the government's official spending plans are based on a 0.5% real annual growth in core defence spending. Why has he invented his own zero growth baseline to produce this fake figure claiming an extra £75 billion for defence? Mr. Speaker, the public will judge ministers by what they do, not what they say. And over 14 years, they've hollowed out our armed forces. They've cut the army to its smallest size since Napoleon. They've missed their own recruitment targets each and every year. They've allowed morale to fall to record lows, and they've wasted at least £15 billion on mismanaging defence procurement. Mr. Speaker, everyone recognises defence spending must rise to deal with increasing threats. We have no access to classified threat assessments or military advice in opposition. So if we are elected to government, we'll conduct a strategic defence review within our first year to get to grips with the threats that we face, the capabilities that we need, the state of the armed forces and the resources available when we get to open the books. This is how Labour will manage the requirements for strong national security and the responsibility for sound public finances. Mr. Speaker, the Defence Secretary clearly likes Labour's plans for defence, as so much is now government policy. But there's still no Tory plan to reinforce homeland protections with a new strategic review, to fulfil NATO obligations in full with a NATO test on our major programmes, to renew the nation's contract with those who serve with an independent forces commissioner to make allies our strategic strength, with a new EU, French or German defence agreement. Mr. Speaker, with threats increasing and tensions growing, we must make Britain better defended. And with Labour, Britain will be better defended.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me just start on the areas that I agree with. He mentions how much we welcome the US Congress putting their $60 billion into the defence of Ukraine. It is something that we warmly welcome. As Churchill was reputed to once have said, America usually gets on and does the right thing when it's exhausted all other alternatives. And it took a long time, but we have got to the point where that money is going to come to Ukraine. And I think that is very, very welcome across this House. He says that he welcomes this announcement today, and then spends all his time explaining, or rather avoiding explaining, why they themselves are not backing 2.5%, with a schedule, with a timescale, with figures which have been published and are in the document produced yesterday and laid in the library of the House. He says, judge us by our action, not our words. You know what? We will, because 11 members of that side's front bench voted against Trident. So it's no good for him and the leader of the opposition to go up to Barrow and to claim that they're all in favour now of the nuclear weapons, of the nuclear defence, because they stood on a platform with a leader who wanted to scrap Trident, wanted to pull them out of NATO, wanted to turn the army into, what was it, a peace corps? Into a peace corps. And now they tell us, judge us on our actions. Well, where is the Shadow Foreign Secretary who voted against Trident? Where is the Shadow Deputy Prime Minister who voted against Trident? Where is the Shadow Community Secretary who voted against Trident? None of them today here on the front bench, none of them presumably in full agreement with the right honourable gentleman, because when it comes to the defence of the realm and when it comes to defending this country, this is the party that has always believed in our nuclear deterrent. We're upgrading it, we're making sure it's fit for purpose, and it's fine for him to come to this dispatch box, neither support the 2.5%, and the House will have noted that, and then also talk about a new review, yet another review. If the problem was having reviews in defence, there would be no issues at all. It is the last thing this country and armed forces require is yet another review, delay, disruption and obfuscation.
Chair of the Select Committee, Jeremy Quinn.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is right to say that we're continually asking more of our armed forces, as the Select Committee's recent report made clear. In that context, I greatly welcome the announcement and the increased investment. But what, of course, we want this to unleash is a triple whammy, one in which our industrial partners also seize the opportunity to invest heavily in capital equipment and in R&D, and in which our NATO allies also see this as a new benchmark to which those who don't already can also aspire and meet. What are we doing to ensure we don't only make this investment, but we also achieve that triple whammy?
Well, my right honourable friend and Chair of the Select Committee is absolutely right about the investment point. I spoke to my opposite number, the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin, yesterday evening, and we were talking about how this will help to galvanise NATO in particular for greater investment, and specifically so that when we go to the NATO summit in Washington for the 75th anniversary, this new baseline is 2.5% rather than 2%, as was set by the UK actually back in 2014, with now, I think, 18 or so of the NATO's 32 members having reached that sum. So investment in that very important signal that's now sent to the whole industrial base for defence, I think, is a critical part of why it is very important to actually set out that plan and stick to it and actually agree to the 2.5% by 2030.